All right, welcome to Ecologic for the month of March. Pretty time of the year. Azaleas in full bloom. Tonight's subject is scouting in Acadiana, and Rob Andries is my guest.
Thank you, Mr. Scheffler. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to join you here tonight. I've was in scouting with you for 20 some odd years, and over those 20 some odd years, we have some stories that we could write books on.
Right?
Some of them are pretty funny, and maybe we'll get to share a few of those with your audience tonight.
Thank you for being here. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Troop 405. It started in 1979. I was a Cub Master for 4 years, and after 2 years, we had a lot of trouble placing the boys, including my own son, Todd, and so we started, it was Pack 405, and we started Troop 405 in '79. And we went till, I guess, 2022, when I was kicked out of the program. My own experience in scouting, it was such a rich thing. Docky Go was our first Scoutmaster, and he brought me to camp. He was on the staff at Camp Thistlethwaite. My first year was 1949. I was not quite 10, and I think in those days you had to be 12 to be in the scouting program. But anyway, Docky let us in, and I was a cooking instructor. I ran a handicraft shop, making baskets and belts and moccasins. And I think everybody made a pair of moccasins. They made a belt. They made baskets. And of course, we had lots of paint and everything. So that was about the third year I was there. I was about 12. And the key was finding the watermelon patches. And there was a big watermelon patch. I guess they had dredged the bayou in 1950. And for some reason, they had left an opening in the levee. And so, big moonlight night, we went into the field, and at the entrance, there's a big white sign that says, "One of these watermelons has been poisoned." So of course I had the keys to the handicraft shop. We had plenty of paint, so we came back and put 2 of these watermelons have been poisoned.
That poor farmer.
Right. Well, he had harvested the crop, so we were not taking anything that was of value, so to speak. That was our justification. Of course, we were still stealing watermelons, and that wasn't as very good at scouting. But anyway, one summer I was the rifle instructor. One summer I was the cooking instructor. One summer I ran the handicraft shop. And those days, the boys had tents that we put up, and they had floorboards, and we had to put up all the tents, take them all down. There was 10 weeks of camp. They had 1 week to put everything up, 8 weeks of running camp. Each parish had a week. Lafayette was the biggest. And so, but we learned about map and compass. And I guess that was the biggest boon to us. Dad had gotten a hold of the maps of the basin, and with it, we could look at a map and we were running a shrimp boat, and of course with map and compass, we're 10, 11, 12 years old. When we weren't at camp, we were running a shrimp boat for the Mosses. Dad had bought a Thompson canoe, paid $38 for a Thompson canoe, which my daughter has redone. And so anyway, that laid the background for my experience in the military, my experience during college, 13 semesters straight, came out with 2 degrees. But anyway, we were about 12 and my brother was about 11, and we had gotten a rubber raft from my cousin in the Air Force, General Kip O'Shuffler, Brigadier General, and he brought us a one-man raft. So we'd go with our bicycles and we'd cross right at the Forks, right by the airport, and went up into that old swamp. And it was in the fall, during squirrel season, and found a crashed airplane. So in those days, about 1952, 53, they had dredged it by in 1950. So anyway, we had left the rubber raft, had to blow it up with our mouth, which we did. But then the big thing was to bring people, a rescue crew, back to the airport. And from there, the shortest way out was the road, the gravel road that now is Highway 90 along the railroad track. And so we knew the direction of the railroad track, and so that was southeast. And so we set up you couldn't see more than 50 feet. And so anyway, very thick underbrush. And it was in the first part of the fall. First weekend of October, I think, was when the squirrel season opened.
Yeah.
And it was the first, yeah. So anyway, we had to get a crew back to the site. And it was 2 big holes and lots of aluminum, and so we made a 200-yard run to get back to the southeast. We put the framing material, and to the northwest we put the sheet metal for about 200 yards, 300 yards. But every 50 feet so we had a target that was 500 yards. And so we walked back to the airport. We knew that the reciprocal on a compass was often wrong. So if you take a reading out to make sure it's right, and we put a big hunk of aluminum at the site, high up in a tree, and we could still see it. We had a 5-degree error in the reciprocal, but we knew what it was. So we went back to the tower with bags full of squirrels. And we got there about noon, and the guys up in the tower called us state police and the sheriff's department. And so, 12 years old at the time, we led that tangle of adults, and it was about a mile into the woods from the opening, and we got right back to the amazement of the sheriff and the state police, and of course the aeronautical people were with us. So a team of about 7, 8 adults, led by 2 little boys, right back to the spot. So we learned map and compass, and what a treasure that was. So anyway, that brings up to Troop 405. So I knew how to run a troop because I had been the troop was handled by Doc Eagle and Pat Gaffrey. They were both all in college, and Pat Gaffrey became a representative. Docky ended up in Germany in the military and had a 3-year hitch, so that was the end of the next guys that came into. We ran the troop for a year without a Scoutmaster. So I knew how to run a troop.
I think they went off to, didn't they? They were called they were called up to duty service, weren't they?
Yeah.
So
They
they
were
they basically lost their Scoutmaster at that
Yeah.
time. So the boys just continued the troop
Yeah.
for the next year at least. I think it
It
was.
was a year, yeah.
Before I think anybody realized they didn't have a Scoutmaster.
Right, yeah. Because in those days, I mean, Lake Martin and all was the choice spot, and we'd bring the ham radios with, I mean, we had crystal radios that we'd bring with us, and we'd put a nail in the ground and we'd run some wire through the trees and hook up a crystal radio. And my uncle was at UL, and he had given me a fixed crystal, which was really the envy of our pretty simple. But anyway, we'd learned so much in scouting, I knew the value of scouting. But we ran the troop for almost a year, and Father Turley came by one night, and we were having our little meeting. He says, "Where's your leaders?" Said they had tests. Oh, okay. Then he came by next week, and the same had. They don't have tests over a whole week. So we had to admit to him that we didn't have a Scoutmaster. So anyway, that's my history as a scout. That brings us to Troop 405, which started in 1979,
How many Eagle Scouts did you have?
125.
125. And if you know a little bit about scouting, you realize that for every 2 Eagle Scouts a troop has, there are 98 other scouts that came through the system.
Yeah,
So if you do the math, let's say at 100,
yeah,
if he had 100 Eagle Scouts, he roughly has touched the lives of probably 5,300 boys within the Acadiana area, or young men within the Acadiana area, in one way or another. And that's a lot of youth that he's had the opportunity to come in contact with and all.
we had a meeting every Monday night, and our dues in Troop 52 was 25 cents a week, and we'd waste half of the time trying to, determine whether you're up to date or not. So I decided there'd be no dues, 'cause that was a big waste of time. You didn't learn anything from that. Then we had a meeting every Monday night, a camp out every month.
And he did not miss. I can tell you right now.
We
He
went-
never missed a camp out in a month.
Yeah,
And some of those camp outs,
during hurricane.
I remember Hurricane Katrina was coming ashore on Monday morning, and Sunday morning, the day before, we're in the basin. And we're camping, we're on a canoe trip, we canoe in, and as soon as we got to the landing, of course, I called my wife, and my wife said, well, where are y'all? And I said, well, we're just getting out of the basin. She says, you'll never, ever make it back to Lafayette. We were south down towards Jeanerette, maybe a little bit below Jeanerette.
Yeah,
And I said, what do you mean? She says, the highways are just packed. There's bumper to bumper traffic. You'll never make it back. And I relayed that message to Mr. Scheffler. And Mr. Scheffler says, oh, we'll be back in Lafayette in 30 minutes. And I'm like, how?
yeah,
And sure enough, he gets on the levee road, and we follow the levee all the way back to Henderson up there. Then we make the back road, take the back roads through, and we're back at the house dropping all the scouts off at 30 minutes later.
yeah.
I was stunned. I just couldn't believe it. But that particular camp out, it was pretty eerie that night because you didn't hear any boats in the basin. There was nothing but helicopters all night long, and we assumed that they were ferrying
Yeah.
workers from offshore in,
Yeah,
down in the basin down there.
yeah. So anyway, meeting every Monday night from 6:30 to 7:30. And that was strictly dedicated to scout skills,
Yep.
not time, map and compass,
Tree ID.
tree ID. Oh yeah,
There was always a topic with the meeting that particular night, and I always like to tell this story too, that we would show up to the camporee, and the Boy Scout camporee is done once a year. All the troops come together, and they have a competition amongst skills. So it would be fire building, it might be orienteering, knot tying, tree ID, map symbols, maps, compass. All the skills were taught there, and I can remember standing there with Mr. Scheffler, and one of the other Scoutmasters comes up and goes, Mr. Scheffler, how many patrols do you have in the competition this camporee? And Mr. Scheffler says, well, I've only got 2 patrols with me this camporee. And the Scoutmaster looks back at him and says, well, at least we know somebody will win 3rd place. So his patrols usually finished, 1, 2, or 3. There was always one in the top 3, if not the top 2
yeah,
patrols within the council, the entire Evangeline Council.
yeah.
And
They could make a 5-run ladder in 2 minutes.
yep, the lashing skills, all the skills that scouting
Plant identification, these map symbols.
Yep.
Yep.
They always learned. There was always, every meeting had a skill set. They always learned a skill set within that meeting. And some would pay attention, some might not, but they would, when they got together and tried it on amongst themselves, it seemed like that they would absorb a little bit of something. And I always like to tell this story too, that in the map and compass skills meetings we would have, my middle son is a captain in the Marine Corps right now. And I remember receiving a letter from him when he was in OCS, Officer Candidate School. And one of the skills that they taught in the Officer Candidate skill is, of course, orienteering, map and compass. And Mark, within that letter, Mark said, he said, Dad, thank Mr. Scheffler for me. He says, I didn't miss a single mark on it. As a matter of fact, they made me the mentor for the entire 200-person officer candidate class, his class. So he would mentor the other officer candidates who were having trouble with that skill of map and compass too.
Yeah.
And within that same letter, he also said, Dad, we also had to set up a tent. The old drill sergeant walked out and said, we had the whole group there, and he says, okay, who thinks they can put a tent together? So I raised my hand, and the old drill sergeant asked him, he says, well, how many minutes do you think, Andries, that it'll take you to put this tent up? And he said, oh, I think I can do it under 5 minutes. And he looked at him real sarcastically and said, Andries, you better put this tent together under 5 minutes. If you do not, the whole group will be running. So Mark got started, and the tent was set up in 4.5 minutes. And he said, Dad, the old drill sergeant couldn't put it up that fast. So it's always good. It's always good when you receive a letter or feedback from your son or a previous scout on some of the skills that they learned within the troop, within those meetings, and within taking a young man at the time. I used to always say that one of the best things that scouting did for a young man was everybody was within a box. And scouting would take them outside of that box, whether it be on a camping trip, at a camporee, or some point within their scouting career. It always took them outside that box. It put them in an uncomfortable position, but they were able to work through that position. And it always seemed like the campouts that the scouts always remembered were those campouts that there was an obstacle or cold weather. There was always, it challenged them in something. They never talked about the easy campouts. It was always those campouts. Do you remember when?
Yeah.
And you look back on them, and they would come into the troop at the age of 11, and
10
then
or 11.
10 or 11 and finish at 18. Some finished earlier, but a lot of them stayed till they were 18. And I always told them that when they entered the troop, they were about this tall, and when they left and we took a picture at the end, they were always taller than myself.
Yeah.
But they always thanked you at the end when they did their Eagle Court of Honor. They always gave a speech, and the probably the most cherished memories I have are some of those speeches that the scouts gave and talked about, Mr. Scheffler, talked about myself, David Begnaud, Bobby Jared. They shared those insights, those campouts that they went on, in which they were challenged and all.
So the troop had, I think, 3 long-term campouts. One was winter camp. 2 was the summer camp. And the 3rd was the trip out west. The trip out west was unbelievable.
Yeah, I think I did, oh my goodness, probably 12 out west trips with you.
Yeah.
And the scouts, if they went to summer camp, they were eligible to go on the out west trip. And the out west trip took them through all the way up to Montana and back through Wyoming. They got to see probably 4 or 5 national parks along the trip.
Yeah.
We camped every night, with the exception of the last night. The last night we did stay in a hotel to get everybody cleaned up, so when we arrived at home, everybody smelled okay.
Yeah.
But those out west trips, those trips were a challenge to the scouts too, because it took them outside their box.
Yeah.
And looking around, looking back at some of those, I think you always had that rule. What was the rule you had? Can't stop.
You can't,
Until the gate says E.
Yeah, you can't stop
wait
till
the
the.
gate says E.
Gate says E.
So, in other words, when you're traveling, you stopped. You always had to go to the restroom.
Yeah,
Some of the troop would be cleaning the windshields, putting the gas in the vehicles, while the others went to the restroom and back and forth. And there was this one particular out west trip, and I'll never forget this. And I'm not going to use the scout's name, but if he's listening tonight, I will say this particular scout is a sergeant in the United States Army. He has his jump wings. But we are leaving Spearfish, South Dakota. And if anybody knows where Spearfish is, it's in the southwest corner of South Dakota. And we're heading up towards Billings, Montana. So we're going to cut the corner of Wyoming, go into Wyoming, and then back into Montana. And if you've ever been in the eastern side of Montana, I can assure you it does not look like Yellowstone, the television show. The scenery doesn't look like Yellowstone. It's just flat grassland out there. And we're trailing along, and the vehicles are all in line, and we have radios so that we can talk amongst the vehicles of what's going on. And this particular scout says, Mr. Rob, I have to go to the bathroom. And I turned around, not turned around, but I said, you didn't go while we were at the McDonald's in Spearfish? And he goes, oh, I went, Mr. Rob. I did go. And I'm like, oh, no. Tell me, Blake. I said, do you have to go 1 or 2? And he said, I have to go 2. And I said, Blake, there's not a tree around here. There's no tree for 200 miles. And he says, I don't care. I said, okay, let me radio Mr. Scheffler. I don't think he's going to be very happy, but let's radio him. So I radio Harold. I said, Harold, I got one that needs to go to the restroom. And Harold radios back and says, didn't he go at Spearfish? And I'm like, oh, no. Yes, he did, but he doesn't have to go 1. He's got to go 2. And I kind of pull the radio away, and Mr. Harold screams back, and he says, well, doesn't he know there's not a tree for 200 miles? And I'm like, yes, Mr. Scheffler, we've had that discussion. And he goes, he doesn't care. So Harold says, radios back and says, well, I'll find something. And about 2, 3, 4 miles goes by, and the radio cracks again, and there's Harold. He says, Rob, there's a creosote post up here. And I'm like, a creosote post? He goes, yep, that's the only thing that's out there. So sure enough, we stopped at that creosote post. But, those are the kind of stories. And he would tell you to this day that was one of the funniest things that ever happened to him on that particular trip and all. I think some of the other stories we have, I remember very well my first backpacking trip with Troop 405. And I was coaching soccer, and we had just moved to Lafayette. This was in 2002. And I tell Harold, he says, well, we're going camping this weekend. We're at the meeting. And I said, well, what time are we leaving? He says, we're leaving at 10 o'clock on Saturday. And we were going up to Kisatchie to backpack. And I said, well, Mr. Scheffler, can we push it back to about noon? I'm coaching a team. He goes, nope, troop leaves at 10. I said, all right, Mr. Scheffler, I will find you. I know the trail very well. I've been on it. We will find you, but we won't be there till probably 7:30 at night or so, give or take. By the time we finish soccer, get up to Kisatchie, and then hike in the 4 or 5 miles. Sure enough, we arrive about 7:30, 8 o'clock, cook dinner. We go to bed. And my son and I are laying in the tent, and if you ever camped and you have a headlight on and you roll over in the middle of the night, you see the tent, you go, oh no, my headlight is on. And, but it wasn't, my headlight wasn't on. In the distance, I hear a rumble. And I'm like, oh no, it's fixing to rain. And it started raining at about midnight, and it rained till 7 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, it rained cats and dogs. And my son gets out of the tent, walks over, comes back. I'm laying in the tent, and he says, Dad, he says, Mr. Scheffler has a fire going. And I'm like, a fire? And after all that rain? He goes, oh yeah, he's got a big fire going. And I said, tell me he's not cooking breakfast on that fire. He goes, no, he's not cooking breakfast. But I have to tell you something else, Dad. And I said, sure, what? He says, he doesn't like ponchos. And I'm like, why not? He goes, because when you lean over a fire with a poncho, it swings out and it can melt right to you. And I said, well, I'm sorry. Tell Mr. Scheffler you'll have rain gear the next camp out, but you only have a poncho. And so he goes off. So I get out of the tent, proceed to get out of the tent. And I had a poncho, and I knew the poncho I pulled out. I had them rolled up in an area. But I just didn't have any poncho. I had the yellow Disney Mickey Mouse poncho. And when I threw it out, I went, I didn't grab the adult size. I walked up to Mr. Scheffler in my Mickey Mouse poncho with my around my head like this tight. And he looked at me, and I said, I know you don't like ponchos. And all he could do at that point in time was turn around and kind of chuckle a little bit. So Troop gets ready to go on, and Mr. Scheffler says, all right, Troop, load up, let's go. And then he calls out one scout, and he says, take the lead, and we're heading in this direction. And I said, hold on, Mr. Scheffler. Wait a minute. We can't go that way. He says, why not? I said, I know the trail pretty well. There's like 3 big creek crossings we've got to make. And with all that rain last night, those creeks are going to be full of water. He said, Mr. Scheffler looks at me and says, we came in this way, we go out that way. And I'm like, okay. So we start walking, and we reach that first creek crossing, and I'll never forget this. I'm standing up on top of the bank, and Mike Lahaye and David Begnaud and I are standing there. And we watch Mr. Scheffler. And I look at David, and I said, Mike, I said, looks like we're turning around now. I tried to tell him that just about that time. Mr. Scheffler goes right down in the creek, through the water, and up the other bank, and turns around and says, what are you waiting on? And my chin dropped. David looks at me and goes, well, I guess we're getting our feet wet now. We all went through the creek, got up the other side, and hiking on. And a little while later, another scout falls on the ground and starts, oh. And I'm like, David, what's going on? And David said, oh, he always does this on backpacking trips. And I'm like, what do you mean he always does this on backpacking trips? He says he falls down and we'll get back up. And I said, okay. And just about that time, a scout comes up to me and grabs my shirt. I said, yeah, Tyler, what do you want? He goes, Mr. Rob, it's just like the Passion of Christ. And I'm like, I look at him like, what? The Passion of Christ? What? And I'm thinking to myself, what does the Passion of Christ have to do with Troop 405 and this scout laying on the ground? And Tyler looks at me, he goes, Mr. Rob, he's going to fall 3 times, and somebody's going to pick up his backpack and carry it for him. And I went, what? Sure enough, he falls the 2nd time. He falls the 3rd time. And Mr. Scheffler goes, we're leaving you right now. If you don't get up, we're leaving you. And I looked at David. I remember looking at David saying, surely he's not going to leave this scout. And David says, I think he is. And I'm like, surely he's not going to leave this scout. So off the troop goes. And David and I are about 50 yards down the trail, and I'm yelling at him to get up, get up. He's leaving you. And sure enough, I walk back down the trail. I get him up off the ground, and guess who picks up his backpack and carries it? Me. And David goes, I don't know if I do that, Rob. I said, we can't leave him here. So we hiked down the trail a few hundred yards and then come around the next curve, and there's the entire troop standing there. And when they're standing there, I'm like, oop, I just dropped the backpack off the front of me. And I was like, denying, look, I wasn't carrying the backpack. but those were the stories that, we got him with his backpack and we continued on down the trail. And at the time, David had been to Kilimanjaro and had this high, I guess it was caffeine
Right.
shots that you could take, to build up your energy. And so we ended up giving him one of those shots, and we keep going.
Not needles.
Not needles. It was in a bag, a goop bag, and you just sucked on it. And he falls again, and Harold's like, "David, do you have another one of those?" And David's like, "Yeah, I've got another one." So we give him another one, and finally we were able to get him back to the car. I don't know if we would have had that. I don't know how we would have gotten him back, but we ended up getting him back. And those are the stories that.
He made Eagle Scout too.
And that scout actually made Eagle Scout too within the troop, and to this day still talks about his time in scouting and all. We have last month I think you had Peter Heller on the show.
Yeah.
Peter Heller, the first canoe trip I went with Mr. Scheffler. It was a 30-mile canoe trip. 30 miles. Some of it was on moving water, but some of it was on flat water. And we started paddling, and we didn't reach the campsite, I think, until about, it was 7:30 at night. And we had been paddling all day, and we were beat. And I remember at one point I was paddling with Steve Oob, and we were in Lake Foss Point. And I'm like, "Steve, I can't I can't even keep up with Mr. Scheffler and the guy that's in the canoe with him, Peter." And we would get to a point where we could look out and see in the distance, and you'd see a little sparkle from a paddle on the horizon. And Steve looked at me and go, "Well, there goes Johnson and Evinrude."
Yeah.
And so we kept following, and we're down. We had made the portage. We carried the canoes over the levee into the basin, and we were paddling. And I didn't. This was the first time I'd ever been in the basin. We're paddling, and one of the scouts says, "Mr. Rob, we're lost, aren't we?" And I remember saying, "Well," thinking to myself, he might be right. But in the distance, I saw some smoke coming from a tree line, and I said, "I bet that's where Mr. Scheffler and Mr. Peter are. They're in that tree line there, and that's the campfire." Sure enough, we paddled right up to it, set up the tent, cooked dinner, and the scouts were out. I mean, they were just in the tent sleeping. And I'm all day long was trying to put because I was new with the troop, I was trying to put the dads with each of the scouts.
Yeah.
But I couldn't put Peter. I couldn't figure out which son was Peter's within the troop. So I finally asked Peter, I said, "Well, Peter," I said, so which son is yours in the troop?" And Peter goes, "Oh, well, I don't have a son in the troop." And I'm like, "So you just like to come out and paddle 30 miles in a day?" And he goes, "Oh, no. He says, "I'm a writer." And I go, "Oh." And me, completely oblivious, looked at him and said, "So you write for the newspaper? You're doing an article on the basin?" And he goes, "Oh, no." He says, "I write for Outside Magazine, Adventure Magazine, National Geographic." And I was like, "What?" I'm thinking to myself, "So you're doing an article on the basin?" And he looks at me and he goes, "No, I'm doing an article on your Scoutmaster." And I said, "Harold?" He goes, "Yeah, Harold." I said, "That Harold?" And he goes, "Yeah, that Harold." And I'm like, is there something I don't know? He goes, "Well, you don't know who he is?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, he runs the troop and he runs a Cadillac dealership. There must be something I'm missing." And Peter looks right at me and he says, "Oh yeah, Mr. Scheffler is the foremost water quality expert in the United States, and we're doing an article on him about water quality, and he'll be featured in Outside Magazine in August." And I'm like, "That Harold?" And he goes, "Yep, that Harold." And I remember laying there all night long thinking, "Oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into?" And the next morning we proceed to get up, and we put all our life jackets on. We've got the canoes loaded, and everybody's getting ready to go. And I remember telling Mr. Scheffler, before we leave, you need to give me directions on how to get back to the landing. And Harold goes, well, it's real easy. Here we go. Troop, listen up. And he says, look at the river. And it's an offshoot of the Atchafalaya, so the current was moving through it. But it wasn't the Atchafalaya River. He says, you see the river? It's moving in this direction. He said, you need to point your canoe upstream so that when you start paddling, you glide down and you reach the bank at a given point over there. Does everybody understand? Everybody stood there and gave him the bobblehead look. And he said, when you reach that bank, you're going to turn and paddle upstream. And I went, oh, hold on, Mr. Scheffler. You mean to tell me we could have camped upstream last night and then just had to float back to the landing? He goes, anybody can paddle downstream. Those boys need to learn how to paddle a canoe upstream. And I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. So he proceeds to tell me, he says, you paddle up that bank. Once you come to the camps, you're going to come to 3 cypress trees, kind of like the ones that are right behind me now. He says, when you see those 3 cypress trees, it'll come into a big opening. Look for the 3rd portage. Paddle down that portage, and when you come to that one creosote post, you take a left and keep paddling and you'll reach the landing. Got it. All right. Of course, Evinrude and Johnson get on their canoe and they're going. And I finally told Steve, I said, Steve, you take the strongest paddler, we'll put him in the canoe with you. You paddle ahead, I'll come with the rest of the troop up. And so we can make sure we know where we're going. Steve said, got it. He takes off. Well, here comes the troop, the group with the troop. We reach the 3 camps. All of a sudden, there's the 3 cypress trees. And when I reach the 3 cypress trees, I see Steve Uve in his canoe paddling in circles. And I'm like, Steve, tell me you got here and saw which way he went. And Steve just puts his head down and he goes, nope, I didn't. And I'm like, okay, he said the 3rd portage, so we start counting. 1, 2, 3. I said, I think that's the portage we need to go down. But it was really kind of small. And Steve said, no, I think we need to go down this one. I said, okay, you grew up here. I didn't. We'll head your direction. So off we paddle. We paddle another 20 minutes. And a boat comes out of a canal behind us and boom, takes off. And I said, Steve, that boat's going to the landing. We need to go in that direction. So we turn all the canoes around and, the boat, he was moving. So the only thing we could follow were the little bubbles that were left on the top of the water. And I remember to this day one of the scouts saying, we paddled probably another 20 minutes and the scout looks up and yells to me, Mr. Rob. I said, yeah, Parker, what do you want? He said, we're lost, aren't we? And I said, no, we're not. Count the canoes. How many do you see? So he counted to me. He says, 9. I said, that's right, Parker. Who's missing? He says, Mr. Scheffler. I said, that's exactly right. We know exactly where we are. It's Mr. Scheffler who's lost. And sure enough, I was never glad to see one creosote post before in all of my life. We paddled probably another 20 minutes, and there's that creosote post. We make the turn. And sure enough, we run into the landing, and there's Mr. Scheffler and Peter Heller standing there with the wildlife and fisheries guys. He said, we were going to give you another 10 minutes, and if we didn't find you, we were coming out looking for you. And to this day, I still remember those directions from Oscar Island, how to get back to the landing down there and all. But those are the kind of stories that you generate over the years when you do scouting. And I think a lot of people, they son or daughter, whether it's a son or daughter now, females are in scouting and all. It's how do you want to spend the time with your children, right? Think about it. When they turn 11, you've got maybe 7 years with them. When they turn 18, they're off to college. Some of them off to the military. Some of them off to jobs. So you have 7 years to spend with your child, and there's not a better program out there that you can spend time with and learn at the same time. Both myself and my 3 boys, you know, I was lucky. All 3 of mine were Eagle Scouts, and they spent their time within the program. And you know, to this day, they'll tell you some of the best things that they ever learned within the troop was, one of which was public speaking. You know, our greatest fear as adults are to stand up in front of a group of people and have to talk to that group. And if you looked at the scouts were taken out of that little comfort box and made to public speaking, you know, within the group, within the troop, within the patrol, within the council. They were asked to do certain things within that taught them those skills, public speaking. You know, learning and scouting is done both inside and outside.
I think for 30 years we led the flag detail for the Mardi Gras parades.
Yeah, that was probably one of the funnest things the troop did. We carried all the flags and banners before 5 parades, and it never failed during that time. You know, you don't realize how many people that you know, but not only that Mr. Scheffler knows. You couldn't walk 10 yards down the parade route and somebody's screaming for Mr. Scheffler, you know.
Right.
And then we would carry beads for the kids so that they could throw beads along the route and everything. And of course, Mr. Scheffler, once he got his hands on the beads, he knew so many people that the beads were going out and in and out. And
That same kid that was in Wyoming had
Yeah.
to stop the whole parade,
yeah, and
go to the bathroom.
you know, with the beads back and forth, and I think it was Bobby Jarrett. I told Bobby, I said, you know, we can only carry so many beads in our backpack. They're loaded down, so we could only carry so many. And Mr. Scheffler knows so many people, and he's throwing so many beads. And Bobby goes, "Oh, I know how we handle that." And I'm like, "How?" He goes, "Oh, it's real simple, Rob. When you pull out a pair of beads, just give him a tangle bunch and let him work through that tangle bunch." So that's how we actually slowed Mr. Scheffler down a little bit. We'd hand him the tangle beads, so he was in there trying to pick them out to throw them and all, so we could carry more beads and all. But that was really a fun time within scouting.
Then the next, I think, big event was building the hut for Festival International.
Yeah, that was a pretty big ordeal for Festival International for how many years?
I think
20?
and
more than
I
that.
don't know, it's 35 years. So
As long as the festival's been
Yeah.
around. Troop 405 would set up what we had: a minor first aid, information, and lost and found within Festival International, and it was always on the corner of Vermilion
yeah,
and Jefferson. And the troop would go out. We would cut palmettos and bamboo.
yeah,
And then the troop would get together and they would lash the booth together with lashings and all. And it was so well built you could literally hang on it.
yeah.
And then the palmettos were on the outside of it. And I know one of the times, it was one of the first years that I was there at the information booth. This lady walks up to me and she's speaking French, and my French is not very good, practically zero. And I'm trying to help her through it, and one of the scouts walks up and says to me, "Mr. Rob, I have this." And I look at him like, "Okay." And he starts speaking French to this lady. And he tells her exactly what she wanted to know, and she tells him, thank you, and off she goes. And I looked at him and I said, I didn't realize you spoke French. And he goes, well, Mr. Rob, I'm in the French immersion school in Lafayette, and half our day is taught in French and half is taught in English. And it was a real eye-opener that day at the booth there.
Yeah.
Perfect French to this lady. And
I think, I can think of all the fun we had. I remember at camp one year, there was one of the scouts had an hour free time, and couldn't have that, so sent him to the rifle range. And we had, at the time, active duty instructors from Fort Polk. And so these are Army Rangers, so to speak, and best riflemen in the world. And anyway, after the second day, one of the instructors that I knew says, little Johnny you sent us, he's the best shot in town. I mean, he's the best shot in camp. I said, wow. And so anyway.
yeah, I
When
think
it was the third day, I mean, that reputation had gotten her. So you walked into the cafeteria and there'd be somebody saying, well, there's the top gun in camp. And when he pulled the trigger, it was 22 rifle range, and every time he pulled the trigger, it was in the bullseye, So that changed that kid. He probably had a little bit of Alzheimer's, tended to be teased, and of course, if you the top gun at camp, you don't want to be teasing that guy.
yeah,
But it kind of changed that kid. It made him realize that he would be very reluctant to speak before the troop. And the next month or so, he's there giving a talk before the troop. So, life-changing event for him.
that's all. He came outside of his box there.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah, I think scouting, gives the kid or the scout. It's one of the things also is about achieving goals. We go through life and we always set goals for ourselves, and in scouting, you work your way through the different ranks of scouting, and the highest rank you can receive is the rank of Eagle. And along the way, they're taught different skills, and they take what they call merit badges. And some of the merit badges are, orienteering, cooking, surveying, railroading, forestry. And it teaches them a skill. They're learning about that particular skill, and some of these merit badges that they take also leads them to their career later on. They have the law merit badge, where in camp they have a full trial there. The Judge Shalom comes in and hosts the trial there. They have attorneys that sit with them and teach them about the courtroom.
a mock trial.
It's a mock trial.
Yeah.
Orienteering with the compass. If you're looking as an individual and within the public, the merit badges are taught with merit badge books, and these particular books are given out to the scouts when they take a particular merit badge. And this merit badge is on orienteering, And if you, as in the public, are interested in any subject, you can Google merit badges, look at the merit badges they have, go to the local scout office, pick up a book. These books, I use these books to this day, about orienteering, map skills, compass, surveying. I have my books and all.
Close with a couple of comments. One kid going through his Eagle board, and they asked him, he'd been in the troop 7 years, and they asked him, he'd finished high school, he was about 18. What are you gonna do when you finish your Eagle? He says, I'm gonna join the Marine Corps and take it easy.
That is true. I can attest to that too.
15 seconds.
He says he's going to join the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So if you get a chance, I would just like to close with you. If you get a chance, you have that chance, look into scouting. It's a great program.